Good morning. Scott here. I can't believe it's been 2 weeks since I got FSD beta. It's been an exciting 2 weeks. And while some things about it totally amaze me, other things baffle me completely. In this video, we'll look at some of both those, the things I like, the things that baffle me, but I'll also be making some suggestions for fixes. Some that are really easy, like are just simple if-then statements or rule changes, versus some that I don't have solutions for because they need to be trained on the neural net. The first thing I have to say is how amazing this software is. Well, I don't think we appreciate how difficult things that we take for granted are for computers to do. For example, we can look at a scene and instantly identify objects, their vectors, where they're going, and what their intent is. That's insanely difficult. To put this in perspective, I remember about 3 years ago, I was talking to one of my children, and I said, you know, in your lifetime, you're going to see self-driving cars. Well, here we are 3 years later, and I own a car that is self-driving and will be fully self-driving, I'm sure, within a couple years. So it's amazing technology. I admire Elon's vision and persistence and determination in getting this to market. With that said, that it needs improvements, and I'm not going to be shy about pointing out those improvements. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing I noticed about FSD was how much better it is at doing certain things than autopilot. Obviously it does turns and things that autopilot doesn't, but autopilot seems to be about 2 seconds behind the power curve. It's slow to brake, it's slow to accelerate after a car has cleared. FSD is pretty much on. I'd say maybe it's a half second slower than I am in seeing things and reacting, but it's much better than autopilot was. And it does some things really well, like suggested turns. I don't know if you saw our lake drive, but it's full of turns where the suggested speed limit is much less than the actual speed limit. And FSD, at least during the day, handled that without any problems at all. That same drive threw autopilot into a spin. So there are some things it does great. It'll follow the road all day long. It generally follows traffic without issue. In fact, I've gotten so comfortable in it lately. You know how when you're in a car sometimes you'll be daydreaming and you'll come to and go, hey, where did those last 5 miles go? Well, I had that happen to me on FSD the other day. And that's a good thing, I think. But there are a lot of areas that need improvement. And I'm going to break that down into 2 categories. One, things that are easy to fix, that are simple rule changes or if-then statements that they can fix. And then other things that are of a more general nature that will require neural net training. But let's start with the simple things first. One of the easy fixes, and it was a bit perplexing when I saw it, and it confuses me to this day, is what I call the snappy car, where the visualization on the display is not accurate. There's a separate neural net that tracks where the lanes are, and then another neural net, maybe there are several, that put the objects in there, and they take all that data and create a 3D vector space. And the car uses that to determine what to do. I'm assuming that the display we're seeing in the car is a subset of that vector space. If it is accurately reflecting what is in vector space, then there's a real obvious problem. You'll notice here as the cars come towards you, they'll drive off the road and then snap back into position when the side cameras start taking over. Shouldn't there be alignment between the lane neural net and the object neural net? I mean, it seems pretty important to me if you have oncoming traffic coming at you at high speed that you need to know exactly where that is. Maybe it's just an artifact of translating the vector space into what the display shows. But even so, it needs to be fixed because it's disconcerting. It makes you think that the car doesn't know where the objects are accurately enough. Here's another example, trash cans in the middle of the road, and it doesn't build confidence, and it seems like it would be a simple thing to fix. Another thing is that it tailgates all the time, and it's hard to see in the videos because it's got a wide angle lens, but I'm uncomfortable constantly. And the irony of this is, in my safety score, the only thing I would usually get dinged on would be following distance. And I follow at least 50% further behind than FSD does. And it can be dangerous too, because there are situations like I've been following a truck on a high-speed road with a turn ahead, and it knows the turn is coming, but it doesn't start preparing for the turn, actual steering, until it can see it. And if you're tailgating a truck, you don't see that turn as early as you would if you were back where you belong. What's also strange about it is it appears that the following distance setting has no bearing. I've sat there tailgating a vehicle and changed it from 2 to 7, and the distance doesn't change at all. That should be an easy fix. Speaking of following distance, I'd like to further recommend that they extend the range from 2 to 7 to 2 to 10, with 10 being how far back you'd need to be on a country road at night when you're the only 2 cars on the road in order to make the guy in front of you feel like he's not being hounded. It also should blink sooner. Maybe because we do a lot of country roads that are, 50 miles an hour. You want to let the guy behind you know you're preparing to turn, because there's, generally not a pull-off for that turn. So you want to let the traffic behind you know you're going to turn well in advance, and FSD doesn't. It'll sometimes wait until it's starting the turn before it signals. Another easy fix, and one of my biggest pet peeves, is it tends to go towards the outside of turns. So if you're making a right turn, it will tend to hug the center line, which gets a little scary if you have oncoming traffic heading at you at 60 miles an hour. Likewise, it'll swing to the outside towards the edge of the road when you're making left turns. But it's those right turns with high-speed oncoming traffic that get you. So, just stay in the middle. Or if you've got high-speed traffic coming at you in a right turn, bias towards the edge of the road, definitely not towards the center line. On one of our drives, we were coming through a section of road where the speed limit decreases from 50 down to 35. And we crossed into the 35 zone at over 50 miles an hour. And that's because it didn't start decelerating until it saw the sign. There was a speed change ahead sign that it could have noted. And the map data, I'm sure, lets it know that the speed change is ahead. So I think personally that what it should do is, if you're decreasing speed from a higher speed to a lower speed, then you need to be at that lower speed by the time you actually hit that speed limit sign. As you can tell in this video, there was a kid there waiting on the bus, and we're zooming by at over 50 miles an hour in the 35 zone, and that's not safe. Now going up, you should wait until you're at that higher speed before you accelerate. But coming down, I think the car should be at the lower speed by the time it gets to the sign showing that lower speed. I don't know if I'm stupid or old or a combination of both, but one of the more disconcerting things about FSD is I often don't notice when it has disengaged. And that's pretty important, especially if you're in a turn. So I think there needs to be an indication of that. And my suggestion is that, how you get the blue at the top of the screen when it's asking you to keep your hands on the wheel? Do the same thing except in red for just like a half a second. Just flash that red at the top of the screen if it has disengaged. And if I've disengaged, flash the yellow so that I know that it's taken. It's also hard to tell whether I intervened or it disengaged. And doing that would allow us to tell the difference. The other easy fix regards unmarked lanes. It handles unmarked lanes just fine. The problem is I think it divides the road into two, but it hangs towards the left. And that's perfectly fine if there's no oncoming traffic. But if you've got a car coming at you at 50 miles an hour the other way, then hanging towards the left makes you feel like you're playing chicken with them. And it's hard to tell in the video, but I very much felt uncomfortable in those situations. So my suggestion would be, on unmarked lanes, if it's wide enough, divide the road in two and bias towards the left when there's no oncoming traffic. But when a car starts coming at you, then bias towards the right. and it won't feel nearly as uncomfortable or as unsafe. One day we took the car out and FSD just wouldn't engage. It kept saying it's unable to engage at this point. And so I stopped, I cleaned off the cameras, I rebooted, and nothing fixed it. And so I decided, well, maybe it was updating and it needed to be near Wi-Fi to finish the update or something. So I took it home, and once it was in Wi-Fi for half an hour or so, I took it back out again and it worked just fine. Now I have no idea whether that was the issue at all. I would think that if it's updating the software, it would tell you. It always has in the past, except for map data, which is done in the background. But easy fix, let me know what it's doing. I mean, why is FSD not available? I've had it tell me that cameras are occluded, which is kind of funny. Out here in the country at night, we'll be driving along and it'll say that FSD will be degraded because one of the side cameras is occluded. And it's not occluded, it's just dark. There's nothing to see out there. But in any case, I think FSD should tell us what the issues are if it's not available. Well, so much for the easy fixes. The rest of the things I'll be bringing up are more general in nature. You know, watching videos on YouTube, you get an expectation of what you think FSD is going to do. And my biggest disappointment when I got it was how poorly my car does on unprotected intersections. You watch videos of Chuck's turns, which are incredibly difficult. High-speed traffic coming from your left, moving into center median, and then checking for high-speed traffic on your right. And you see the car navigating that successfully. I don't think I've had a single left turn on a 2-lane highway where there's been traffic involved where it's done it correctly. And very few right turns.
Nope.
I don't know what the issue is. It's just not seeing the traffic. There are things that I would throw in the what is it thinking category. For example, at the slow end, we've got a turn at my street here where the road pretty much just continues on turning to the left, and the lane to the right has to yield to us. Nobody stops at that. People might slow to check that, make sure that there's no traffic coming from the right, but FSD stops and then it sits there and thinks about it for a couple seconds. I don't know what it's looking at. Its field of vision is fairly clear at that point. It could easily roll through that intersection, but it stops and thinks, and I have no idea what it's thinking about. But I'd rather do that than what I'm going to show you now, which is it knows it needs to make a right turn, and then all of a sudden it changes its mind and decides it wants to shoot across the street or make a left turn. I have no idea what it's thinking. I don't even know what to say except to point it out. It's also going to have to get better at night, and I don't know about snow yet, but I would imagine it's going to have problems in the snow because oftentimes it will be jerky, and if you're jerky on an icy road, that's not going to end well. I do know it has problems at night. That lake drive we were talking about earlier that FSD did beautifully during the day, it did very poorly at night. I had it out in fog the other day and it seemed to do just fine. The fog wasn't very thick, but the drive was just fine. It was seeing the cars as soon as I would see them, so I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. My experience in the rain is that you get a lot of messages saying that FSD may be degraded due to occluded cameras. A lot of those. Although I can't actually remember any instance where it affected FSD's ability to navigate, at least in those areas where it does well. One of the things that was disconcerting, because I thought it had already been fixed, is I've had 2 instances where it's missed ambulances, one coming from the side at our front and one coming up from behind us, where I've had to intervene and pull over on the side of the road. It missed both of those. One of the more curious ones is it has a tendency, at least in my experience, and if you've watched our roundabout video on FSD, you've seen it, is it wants to stop in the middle of roundabouts or make unnecessary lane changes while it's going in the roundabout. I also think FSD is going to have to evolve to where it's planning further forward. If you saw a roundabout video, it got in the correct lane to handle a complicated series of roundabouts, and I was very impressed until it got into the roundabout and tried twice to change lanes out of the lane it was supposed to be in. And this is not an uncommon occurrence. I've had it happen many times. In the same roundabout video, there's a lane that enters as one lane, then divides into two, but merges back to one again for whatever reason. And it's over a very short period of space, probably a couple hundred yards. But FSD pulls into the right lane only to have to merge again into the left lane 200 yards later. Often it'll end up moving out of the correct lane into an incorrect lane, so it has to merge back later. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's also not as smooth as I would expect. It brakes a lot, and little jerky brakes. I'm actually a bit disappointed because in my personal driving, I've got to the point where I use the brakes not at all. And I kind of take a bit of pride in that my brakes are going to last forever. And it's constantly putting the brakes on, little jabs here and there as it corrects for things that really aren't there. I've had phantom braking, one that felt pretty severe, but when I looked back really was only 5 or 6 miles an hour, but it came on really strongly. So it still has the phantom braking issues, and I'm sure it'll get smoother and handle those as we go on. Those issues I just discussed are general issues. There have been specific instances where FSD has failed, but 98% of the time it does it right, so I don't mention it. For example, there was a motorcyclist in front of me once that had to stop and wait for traffic in order to make a left turn. And normally FSD handles this, I'd say 99.9% of the time, but for whatever reason, this time it waited way too long to put the brakes on, and I had to slam on the brakes and swerve a bit off the road to avoid hitting the motorcycle. But that's not a trend, and so those sorts of things aren't mentioned here. I just mentioned the trends. There will be other failures, and all that does is emphasize how important it is to be diligent while you're driving this thing. Constantly diligent, no matter how safe you think it is. In any case, I hope you found this useful. I apologize that it's not as professional as some of my other videos. I've got a whole lot of videos that I'm working on right now, including one called FSD Will Try to Kill You, and that's great, which emphasizes the need for diligence. I also made a mattress for my Model Y that's very comfortable, and so I'm sharing that. FSD 10.69.2.3 is being released, so I'm waiting for that to show up. And I've got a 4-month video on my car I'm working on. So I've kind of rambled on this one. Thank you for your patience. I hope if you enjoy this sort of content, you'll subscribe. And maybe if we get enough traction, this will cross Tesla's desk and it'll help accelerate FSD's improvement in some small way. That would be my hope. In any case, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and until later, happy travels.